Thank you for that, Kristín Vala. Our next speaker is Clifford Frei. Clifford Frei is an activist of human rights, environmental protection, internet freedom and privacy, and co-founder of the Zeitgeist movement in Germany. With a background in computer science, graphic art, and linguistics. His involvement in the movement first began in Berlin during his studies when the movement was first founded. He, along with other Europeans, created a lot of the framework, projects, and events that has been co-created in an open source format throughout the rest of the movement. He has been globally active in the movement and mostly involved with TCM, Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Sweden, Ukraine, and Iceland. Other involvement of his has been in sustainable and ecological development of architecture, emission-free, ecological cargo sailing, and cultural and art performances. Welcome, Clifford.
So before I begin, not to be so exclusive, but I do have a few words that I would like to say, particularly to people here in Iceland. So just a few words. Bara, ég hefur dreymt þennan dag og bara ég vissi ekki aldrei hvernig þetta átti að gerast. Bara, já, það er mjög áhugavert og já, ég hef að þakka mikið fólk hérna á Íslandi að vera að gera þessi viðburðin hérna á Íslandi og vegna COVID-19, svo ég er mjög glaður að kynna ykkur og hérna, já, ég hlakka til að gera svona betra framtíð með ykkur saman. So it's been a real big pleasure, and since this wouldn't have been possible without all of you, and just how much of a difficult event this was to help organize. It's just, I'm very happy that we're here right now making this happen. So I am talking about Koto Co Op. Basically what this is going to be about is, this is a lot of not only a vision, but it's an actual project and foundation basically that is in the process right now. So to give you a little bit of a gist of like what I'm going to be talking about. So imagine that you're basically in the woods in Finland, and basically you are not working, doing stuff that you hate, things that you find just very tedious, and you feel like you have a really good social atmosphere and that you're in a very good relationship also with neighboring people or whatnot. You spend a lot of time just working on things to actually cultivate and keep this community going. You have a lot of recreational, getting together, cultural stuff, sauna, beer. It sounds really nice. Even the bears are even joining. And this is basically the vision of Koto Co Op, and how do we get to something so enjoyable and something, as Vala mentioned, something of perhaps well-being on a greater scale. Koto is something that came influenced out of the Zeitgeist movement. You have people originating from Finland is where the project is now found and laid, and some of these people are actually very dear friends of mine. So some of the four people that were involved in founding it, if you're looking now on my screen, the two faces there, I like to call them the Usos, because they're both called Uso, but to differentiate them, the one on the far left I call the big Nordic bear of TZM. And then there is the other two. There's Thomas, I think, and then Axeli is his name. And so this is something that, again, has started to get a lot of attention from people involved in the movement, because this is something that is not only just of promoting awareness of post-scarcity economics, as we would call it, or better well-being, but it's an attempt to really put it into practice. And I will explain some layers of how. So some of the goals that basically what Koto is that, and anyone that's wondering, the name Koto is not of Asian or Japanese origin. The word koto is a former old word for home in Old Finnish. I believe this word was actually coined there for the name of the project by Big Nordic Bear himself. And basically, you have that koto, which you call the home, and then what you have is you have the co-op part. So anyone that is not familiar with a co-op is that it's basically an organization of people similar to what you would have in most, I guess, the businesses or whatnot, except for the goal is that it's very, how would you say, just very like, it's not so hierarchical, and some of the goals are basically not really for profit. And what the co-op part of Koto basically acts is, it acts like as a bridge from, for example, an eco community that you could see there in Finland, and how this basically links then Koto to the rest of civilization that does not basically follow these kinds of means of an economic system. So you could say that Koto is not a cult or something that's trying to isolate itself far in the woods in the northern Finland or whatever. So the attempt is to also try and both inspire maybe others to try this type of philosophy or this type of economic system, as well as that Koto cannot be alone by itself in the world, and it still needs a participation of even other monetary factions or bodies in order to sustain itself for its current moment. So they are basing basically a lot of things on, again, new social structures, basically. So trying to work in a sense, very egalitarian, trying to work as a small community that can settle, for example, on like on a piece of land at first. And then the idea of having different units, as they would call them. So like different, maybe like centers of the Koto community would be existing in different places. And so what you would have is that you would have people in Koto basically working for more or less a common purpose for well-being, and also trying to sustain the Koto economy, maybe you might want to call it at that point. And then in the end is that basically that you have, again, the co-op part. So you have people within this community, and in order to sustain it, basically people are working very collaboratively together to uphold this community and whatnot. And then you have basically, again, the co-op part, which will allow Koto to act as a business, so it can produce services to those outside of the Koto economy, to try and either reimburse or also to give them some kind of ground leverage, so that they can go ahead and either, if they have to buy stuff from other corporations or from other people, that basically it's not just living in teepees in the woods or chopping down trees to make houses or whatever. That's basically not what Koto is trying to go for. It is basically just being another complete isolated eco village, or one that does not have like such goal in mind. So one of the most important thing as far as the philosophy of people living in the community of Koto, which I believe a lot of people involved in the Zeitgeist movement are perhaps very familiar with, is basically a sharing or a gift type of economy, where basically the acts of sharing and not trying to have so much ownership of things becomes kind of counterproductive in trying to make a community like this work out. So instead of like here, an example I'll even throw out is the Reykjavik tool library that we have, or tool libraries that also exist in other countries. It makes so much sense that they exist because you have, for example, a huge production of hammers or whatever kind of tools you need that in the end cost lots of energy, or if you want to use in terms of financial money, and as well as resources from the earth to develop all these things. And most of the time when people buy these things, they usually are not used so very often. They sit for a very long amount of time. And then there could be other people not to the advantage or whatever, or without any accessibility to get these things. And so they sit under this this current notion of ownership that we understand that is very dominant in our current intellect and society. And so the idea is that in Koto, we of course not try to revoke people's things or whatever. If you come in and you have a laptop or something, that's unnecessary, that it automatically has to be taken at any time of convenience to anybody else in it. But basically there's a very good, there's a trust, there's a very strong trust and lots of communication involved in it. And so this is something that I think plays a very big role in how Koto wants to try and operate in the future. And so basically, again, while Koto is spending a lot more time on things like, again, so the society aspects and also the ways of how a community can be on the same level, and so non-hierarchical and whatnot, they are not necessarily like open source ecology, where they are also going to be trying to rebuild, if anybody's familiar with them. They basically would not be like how open source ecology is, trying to rebuild lots of mechanisms or tools or whatnot from scratch, but rather Koto, again, just as I mentioned, would like to collaborate with all these organizations, maybe even rebuild and use them, give feedback and whatnot. And then also that, of course, participate with all these other organizations, because again, it's the idea is to collaborate and be more connected with even those that would not be necessarily considered Koto economies or whatever post-scarcity economies. We're trying to find the most common ground with all people and try and work with them on that plane. Yeah, so there is a business plan already in Koto. It makes perhaps around 380 euros a month, approximately. And again, so there are ideas of the YouTube channel. There is now a Patreon page being used, and also the ideas of what kind of, could they make some kind of content that is not of just use of people interested in this idea, but also people outside of the community that would also like to, that would also maybe like find some mutual ground interest in what this community is trying to do. And therefore, if people like it, of course, donations or anything that can help fund this further is really required to get to a further step in the community. Yeah, and then there is basically, there is the idea that perhaps, again, that in the future, that they would be able to create some kind of like business inside of Koto, where, again, they can give services to other people, and then they can sustain their own community. Which, if I to be clear on that, when being a part of Koto, that doesn't mean that you go in then and you're subjected to pay rent, or you're paying for electricity, or you're paying by this in a monetary sense. What you're actually paying in is you're paying in a sense of respect and contribution to your encouragement to want to keep that community alive. So that's where it would see itself in the future, is trying to make it big on that scale. Now, also the idea is not to just keep this in Finland, but also, again, to inspire people that find this kind of train of thought and philosophy very interesting. So I actually want to share something, and one of the reasons why I called my presentation The New Thing was simply because that's one of the ideas I had while learning both from Koto and then also lots of other things in the Zeitgeist movement in terms of post or alternative economics or whatnot, is I thought that this would also be something very cool to try and hear and adopt in Iceland, which I know all this stuff is nothing really new, I think. Perhaps maybe the thing I've noticed in most communities or whatnot is that they tend to have very big difficulties in trying to sustain type of peace or egalitarian or infighting, or even, again, financial stuff, because there's a huge avoidance, even especially in those in the movements, in the Zeitgeist movement and others, like Bounce, is the avoidance of any kind of monetary involvement, when actually, with all honesty, people within TZM have been very most of them have been dependent and using it much longer and using it whether if they like it or not, more or less. And it's just how you're going to concentrate and use that monetary support and whatnot. So here in Iceland, I came up with the idea coming back from interest in how Germanic folks or even Vikings, Nordic people had what we still use as a term called a thing here in Iceland or in other Nordic countries. So I thought of the idea of having a new thing, basically, that I would like to use as kind of a open source kind of projection, kind of distribution of this Koto philosophy. And I want to try it here, basically, and see how people here in Iceland would like the idea of having a kind of a community that would be working in a co-op sense. Or I had the idea of maybe even doing something much more different, which would be to have more of a community center that would not be a place which you would live and sleep in and live at like you would with Koto, but the idea would be to basically have people come to a place where they would be able to share ideas, like for example presentations that we are doing. So I've always given the example for the Zeitgeist movement that this event takes just once a year basically, and that after that it's basically left in the background and it goes home. But this could be a place where you can get people who have no intention of maybe living in a community outside of the city of Reykjavik or whatever, or going as far as to Seyðisfjörður or whatever, or Egilsstaðir, to live somewhere very remote and isolated. But you can instead share this kind of mentality in some kind of a place where we can also just like share each other's skills and thoughts and all sorts of cool ideas, and also developing a sharing economy in Reykjavik. And I know again that there is already this taking place. The Reykjavik Tool Library, as I mentioned, I think is a big contributor to this right now in Reykjavik. At least it's on the rise. Other people from Iceland can maybe tell me of things that happened before, especially during the Great Crash, where I think a lot of this stuff was probably taking place. But they've been very persistent, and especially during COVID, they've been trying their best to keep this kind of sharing economy alive through the times. And there's a few other things, places I can imagine. So why start another one, basically, is that I think that the more the merrier, and also is to collaborate and interact with all these others, whether it's a tool library or another group, even outside of Reykjavik, that we should be trying to take this train of thought, these ideas, and take them a lot further. And so that's would be the hope of Koto in the future. And so basically, it's just, yeah, it's not about trying to project a model of efficiency or trying to make a superior post-economic system. But again, it's all about, as I would say, as Vala was talking about with well-being, that it's all about that we just want to live well. We don't want to fight, and we don't want to be overly confrontational and projecting things that upset us about things in life. But we would much rather put a lot of this stuff beside us, or keep it very minimal, and really enjoy a lot of stuff that maybe a lot of us forget because of difficult times and things that we're perhaps not very satisfied with in our current economic system. So it depends a lot on how Koto in the future, because of course I actually want to go to Finland and visit the project. They're right now actually looking at some land that they want to buy to start the co-op in Koto. I'm looking at some basic pieces of land. They're just judging how far it is from Helsinki, because again, the point is not to be isolated, but in contact rather. So we will see how that goes. And also here in the future in Iceland, like I will be trying to look for people that also would share that vision here in Iceland to also start something very similar, and hope that they can basically find interest in this. And I hope also people all over the world, basically, that we're basically starting a new thought of ideas, or new thought of communities, I should say, and what that means, community. So I will also then conclude something that has come to mind actually early this morning, is that a lot of people, I could have maybe a lot of assumptions about this, and thinking about how is any of this possible? Again, I think that this approach of Koto, starting very, very small in a smart community, which all communities that want to reach a mass level effect always starts at the micro level before they become the macro. And you know, how is this really going to succeed? Will it ever make enough money? Will infight also be the fate of Koto and all these other new ideas or whatnot? I don't think so. And again, no pun intended, but I really do think it is the new thing to try these things out and to inspire other levels of society, basically, from these small scale projects and models. And I'll just conclude also with something that I remember what Birgitta Jonsdottir told me when I first met her 3 years ago. And that was in terms of, especially when trying to be very democratic and trying to be, in a sense, egalitarian in these things, that is very important to basically tend or trim the weeds and whatnot in the garden of democracy. And I've taken that to heart. She said it a lot better than I did in much detail, but I understood what she meant. And I've meditated on it for all those 3 years. And I think that that is something that especially all of us, whether involved in a community or in a nonprofit that tends to get rid of hierarchies and whatnot, have to really keep in mind that this is not something you rely on an automatic machine to do all the work for you and whatnot. And that this is something that has to really come from something that you really want, you feel passionate for. And again, that it's something that you think it's worth living your life for. And I think in the end, all that stuff and motivation will prevail in making things like Koto and a lot more societies of well-being possible. So, kiitos, tack för.